When Malcolm Harris stepped onto campus, he knew every move would be scrutinized, but he didn't expect his own professor to publicly break him down with cruel mockery. What followed was a fight against racism, systemic injustice, and personal demons, a battle that would force him to prove that his place here wasn't a privilege, but a conquest. How he responded will shock even the most seasoned. But let's start from the beginning. Early in the morning, in a small dorm room on campus, Malcolm Harris, a 22-year-old philosophy student, nervously flips through his notes. His tired eyes, evidence of another sleepless night, scan the scribbled phrases and underlined passages. On his desk lies an open book by Marcus Garvey and a mug of coffee, long gone cold. Today is a big day. His first ever presentation in front of the seminar group. Every moment in this university feels like a test, and Malcolm knows all too well that the stakes are higher for someone like him. Malcolm is the first in his family to attend college, a feat that comes with both pride and pressure. Success is never simple here. His achievements often seem to irritate the privileged students, and even some faculty members. The faint trace of his Detroit accent, something he's worked hard to soften, still sneaks into his speech now and then. Malcolm is painfully aware that he'll be judged not just for the quality of his ideas, but also for his background, his manners, and most glaringly, his skin color. It feels like his every success is examined under a microscope, waiting to be discredited. The seminar room is grand, with towering windows that allow sunlight to stream onto the polished wood floors. The walls are adorned with portraits of famous philosophers, almost all of them white men. Students take their seats around an expansive oak table, their designer sweaters and crisp button-downs a silent testament to their wealth and privilege. Malcolm, wearing a modest black blazer and a clean white shirt, clutches his folder tightly. His hands tremble slightly, but he forces himself to stay calm. Professor Richard Watson strides into the room. At 58, his reputation precedes him, a man of harsh critiques and unyielding authority. With his sharp features and steely gaze, Watson commands fear rather than respect. His lectures are notorious. Students attend not for inspiration, but for fear of failing the course. Watson scans the room, his expression unreadable until his eyes land on Malcolm. "Harris," he says curtly, "let's hear your interpretation of Garvey. Hopefully, it'll be at least a little more compelling than your previous attempt." Malcolm rises slowly, gripping the folder tighter. His voice starts low, almost hesitant, but as he speaks, he finds his rhythm. He outlines the philosophy of Marcus Garvey, self-reliance, pride in one's roots, and the ongoing fight for equality. He weaves in his personal reflections, adding, "I believe Garvey's philosophy is more relevant than ever. It reminds us that our identity is our strength." The room is silent for a moment, but before Malcolm can continue, Watson interrupts with a sharp, sarcastic laugh. "Garvey, you say? Well, if his ideas were so brilliant, why didn't his followers succeed? Or perhaps the issue lies with the followers themselves." A few students chuckle nervously, but Malcolm freezes, the words hitting like a blow. He hesitates, trying to steady himself, but Watson isn't finished. "Tell me, Harris, what's it like being a philosopher in the ghetto? Isn't that exactly what Garvey was talking about?" The laughter grows louder, filling the room. Malcolm feels a knot tighten in his chest as his voice betrays him with a slight tremble. He forces himself to continue, but the humiliation weighs heavily on every word. His sentences grow shorter, his once strong ideas now feel weak. The presentation ends not with applause, but with an uncomfortable silence. Malcolm leaves the seminar room with his head down, his folder held tightly against his chest. In the hallway, he hears snippets of students' conversations. "Did you see his face? He had no idea what to say." "Watson really knows how to put people in their place." The words sting, but Malcolm quickens his pace, desperate to escape their whispers. Just as he rounds the corner, a voice calls out behind him. It's Lily, a classmate with kind blue eyes and an empathetic smile. She catches up to him and speaks softly. "You didn't deserve that." Watson was out of line. Her words offer a brief moment of solace, but the pain lingers. Malcolm forces a smile and thanks her, but inside, he feels the weight of failure pressing down. Later that evening, back in his dorm room, he sits on the edge of his bed, staring at the folder on his desk. Through the thin walls, he hears his neighbors talking about him. "Man, that was brutal. Think he even knows what he's doing here?" Poor guy, but let's be real, he doesn't belong here. Malcolm closes his eyes, his hands gripping the edge of the bed tightly. The anger and shame swirl together inside him. For a moment, he feels like giving up, but deep down a small spark begins to grow. It's not much, just a faint flicker of defiance, but it's enough. He knows now. He will prove them wrong. This day marks the beginning of his fight, and he won't back down. The next morning, Malcolm sits in his dorm room, staring blankly at his laptop. The humiliation from the previous day still burns in his chest, but now it's accompanied by a growing sense of resolve. After pacing the room, he makes up his mind. He has to report Professor Watson. He writes down key points of the incident, gathering his thoughts, then heads to the administrative building. His steps are purposeful, but inside, his nerves churn. The dean's office is pristine, filled with dark wood furniture and degrees framed on the walls. Dean Porter, a man in his early 50s with a calculated, professional demeanor, sits behind a large desk. His expression is neutral as he motions for Malcolm to sit. Malcolm takes a deep breath and begins recounting what happened during the seminar, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. He describes the professor's remarks, the laughter from the class, and how it made him feel. He even shows notes from his presentation that Watson mocked. The dean listens, his hands folded on the desk, but his face remains unreadable. When Malcolm finishes, Dean Porter leans back in his chair and sighs. "Malcolm, Professor Watson is one of our most respected faculty members. He's known for his rigorous teaching style. I understand that his feedback may have felt harsh, but perhaps you misinterpreted his intent." Malcolm's heart sinks. "Misinterpreted? Sir, he humiliated me in front of the entire class. This wasn't feedback. It was targeted, and frankly, it felt racist." Dean Porter's expression hardens slightly. "Racism is a serious accusation, Malcolm. If you have concrete evidence to support this claim, we can investigate further. But without that, I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." Malcolm stares at the dean, disbelief washing over him. The message is clear. Watson is untouchable. As he leaves the office, a wave of hopelessness crashes over him. The system, the one he fought so hard to be part of, is now protecting the very person undermining him. In the following weeks, Watson's behavior escalates. During a lecture, he calls out Malcolm's latest paper in front of the class. "Harris's work is interesting, if not deeply flawed. It's overly emotional and lacks the analytical rigor we expect at this level." The comment stings, and Malcolm feels the eyes of his peers on him. The room fills with awkward silence before Watson moves on, as though he hadn't just humiliated a student. At night, alone in his dorm, Malcolm begins to doubt himself. He rereads his papers, searching for flaws, wondering if Watson might be right. The once burning drive inside him starts to dim. Every critique, every dismissive glance chips away at his confidence. The only person who manages to keep him afloat is his mother. During a late-night phone call, she listens as he pours out his frustration and self-doubt. Her voice is steady, filled with a quiet strength. "Malcolm, you faced worse than this. You fought for that scholarship, for your spot at that university. You've earned it. And no one, not some professor, not even yourself, can take that away from you. Keep going, son." Her words ignite a spark. Malcolm realizes he can't stay silent. If the system won't stand up for him, he'll have to do it himself. Malcolm decides to turn to social media. Late one night, he sets up his phone and records a short video. His voice shakes slightly as he recounts his experiences with Watson. The comments, the humiliation, the lack of support from the administration. He speaks directly to the camera. "This isn't just about me. This is about the countless students who've been silenced or made to feel less than because of who they are. This needs to change." He posts the video, unsure of what to expect. By the next morning, it has gone viral. Thousands of people share and comment. This is unacceptable. The university needs to address this now. This is a systemic issue, and it's time we talk about it. Malcolm feels a surge of hope, but it's short-lived. Alongside the support come hateful messages. One anonymous user writes, "You'll regret dragging Watson's name through the mud." Another reads, "Stop playing the victim. People like you don't belong here anyway." The harassment doesn't stop online. Strange calls begin coming to his phone. Heavy breathing, silence, then a click. One evening, as Malcolm returns to his dorm, he freezes. His door has been vandalized, red paint splattered across it. The words, "Go back to the ghetto," are scrawled in jagged letters. Malcolm stares at the message, his hands trembling. For a moment, he considers leaving, packing up and walking away from it all. But then, the spark his mother lit flares into a flame. He takes a photo of the door and uploads it to social media with a caption. "This is what happens when you speak out, but I'm not going anywhere." The post explodes, drawing even more attention. News outlets pick up the story, and suddenly, Malcolm isn't just a student. He's the voice of a larger movement. The threats and harassment only strengthen Malcolm's resolve. He throws himself into his work, spending long hours in the university library, surrounded by stacks of books and pages of handwritten notes. The philosophy section becomes his sanctuary, where he immerses himself in the works of Black thinkers like Marcus Garvey, W.E.B., Du Bois, and Angela Davis. Their words feel like a lifeline, guiding him through the storm. Malcolm's research evolves into something much larger than a student project. He begins connecting the philosophies of past generations to the modern fight for equality and justice. Late at night, he types furiously on his laptop, drafting essays and reflections. His first article, published in the student journal, sparks a wave of discussion on campus. Titled "Pride and Prejudice, the Unfinished Work of Marcus Garvey," it critiques the institution's failure to fully recognize the contributions of Black intellectuals. Within weeks, Malcolm's work gains traction beyond the campus. His articles are shared online, attracting the attention of academics and activists alike. Encouraged by the response, he submits a proposal to present his findings at an international philosophy conference. When the acceptance email arrives, Malcolm can hardly believe it. He rereads the words multiple times. "We are pleased to invite you to present your research at the Global Philosophy Summit in Chicago." Meanwhile, Professor Watson finds himself increasingly under fire. The social media backlash has cast a shadow over his once sterling reputation. Determined to regain control of the narrative, he pens an op-ed for the university newspaper. In the piece, titled "Cancel Culture in the Classroom, a Professor's Perspective," Watson frames himself as a victim of an overzealous social movement. He accuses Malcolm of misrepresenting their interactions and argues that academic freedom is being stifled by political correctness. The article sparks heated debates across campus. While some rally behind Watson, many see through his rhetoric. A week after the article is published, an anonymous letter appears on a popular student forum. It's from a former student who claims, "Watson humiliated me the same way he did Malcolm. He used to joke that my background wasn't fit for philosophy. I stayed silent back then, but I can't anymore." The post gains momentum, with other students and alumni sharing similar experiences. It becomes clear that Malcolm's story is not an isolated incident. The conference in Chicago is a turning point. Malcolm stands backstage, clutching a stack of neatly printed notes, his heart pounding in his chest. The room beyond the curtain is packed, with scholars, students, and journalists from around the world. A live stream camera is set up, broadcasting the event to a global audience. When it's his turn, Malcolm steps onto the stage, his head held high. The bright lights momentarily blind him, but he focuses on the faces in the crowd. He begins his presentation, weaving together Marcus Garvey's teachings with the systemic challenges faced by modern marginalized communities. Garvey taught us that identity is strength, that self-reliance is freedom. But how can we embrace those principles when the systems around us are built to strip us of that strength? His voice grows steadier with each word. his confidence building as the audience leans in. He doesn't just talk about philosophy. He makes it personal, recounting his struggles with Watson and the institutional barriers he faced. This isn't just about academia. It's about who gets to define what's valid. It's about the voices we've ignored for far too long. When he finishes, the room erupts into applause. People rise to their feet, clapping and cheering. Malcolm sees tears in some eyes, nods of affirmation from others. The conference organizers thank him for his profound and timely insights, and a journalist approaches him for an interview. Within hours, clips of his speech flood social media. National news outlets pick up the story, framing Malcolm as a rising voice for justice and change in academia. His name trends online alongside hashtags like #academicjustice and #voicesheard. Back on campus, the university administration can no longer ignore the growing pressure. In a public statement, the president of the university announces a commitment to revisiting policies regarding inclusivity and discrimination. We are launching an independent review to ensure all students, regardless of their background, feel valued and supported. The statement also promises increased funding for marginalized student programs and mandatory training for faculty on bias and equity. Though the announcement feels overdue, it marks a significant step forward. For Malcolm, the victory is bittersweet. He knows the fight isn't over, but for the first time, he feels the tide beginning to turn. 2 years have passed, and the journey has been anything but easy. Malcolm Harris, now 24, stands in front of a mirror in his dorm room for the last time. The room looks sparse, stripped of the books, notes, and personal touches that made it his sanctuary. Today is graduation day, and Malcolm's name is etched at the top of the list of honor graduates. He has been named valedictorian, the highest academic honor in the university. As he adjusts his graduation cap, Malcolm reflects on the battles he's fought, the hateful messages, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt. They all feel like distant memories now. His research, now published in respected academic journals, has garnered national recognition. The once intimidating institution has become the stage for his triumph. The graduation ceremony takes place in the Grand University Auditorium, packed with students, faculty, families, and guests. Sunlight filters through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the stage where rows of graduates sit in their caps and gowns. Malcolm takes his seat in the front row, his crisp gown and stole gleaming under the lights. The atmosphere buzzes with excitement, but Malcolm remains calm, his focus steady. As the ceremony begins, Malcolm scans the room. In the far corner, he spots Professor Watson. The once commanding figure now seems smaller, hunched slightly in his chair. His face is pale and drawn, the weight of the last 2 years etched into every line. Watson's name has faded from academic prominence, his controversial article long forgotten, his classes sparsely attended. He avoids looking in Malcolm's direction. When the dean steps up to the podium to introduce the valedictorian, a hush falls over the crowd. Our next speaker embodies resilience, determination, and the pursuit of justice. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this year's valedictorian, Malcolm Harris. Malcolm rises and walks to the stage. The applause is thunderous, but he keeps his head high and his expression composed. Standing at the podium, he surveys the sea of faces, classmates, professors, and his mother, beaming with pride from the front row. He begins his speech, his voice clear and steady. 2 years ago, I sat in a classroom feeling like I didn't belong. I wondered if I'd ever be good enough to succeed here. But today, I stand before you, not because someone gave me a chance, but because I took it, despite the people who tried to take it from me. The crowd breaks into applause, but Malcolm pauses, letting the weight of his words sink in. He continues. This degree isn't just a personal achievement. It's proof that barriers, no matter how institutionalized or ingrained, can be broken. It's a reminder that every person, no matter their background, deserves an equal shot at success. His voice grows more passionate as he concludes. To my peers, as you step into the world, remember that your voice matters. Use it to uplift others. To my professors and mentors, thank you for your guidance. And to the university, May this institution continue to strive for true equality so no student ever feels as I once did. The audience erupts into a standing ovation. Malcolm steps back from the podium, his chest heaving with emotion. For the first time, he allows himself a small, genuine smile. As the ceremony ends, graduates and families spill out onto the university lawn, the air filled with laughter and celebration. Malcolm finds himself surrounded by well-wishers, peers congratulating him, professors shaking his hand, even reporters asking for comments. But his attention is drawn to a familiar figure walking toward him. It's Watson. The professor moves slowly, his usual commanding presence replaced with something quieter, almost hesitant. When he reaches Malcolm, he extends a hand. "Harris," Watson begins, his voice softer than Malcolm has ever heard it. "You've proven your point. Perhaps I was wrong about you. About many things." Malcolm studies Watson for a moment, the memory of their first confrontation flashing in his mind. The professor who once mocked him now stands before him, humbled. Malcolm shakes his hand firmly but says nothing. His expression is calm, his silence deliberate. He doesn't need to respond. His achievements have already spoken for him. As Watson walks away, Malcolm turns back to his mother, who hugs him tightly. "You did it, baby," she whispers, her voice thick with tears. "You proved them all wrong." Malcolm gazes out at the campus one last time. The journey was long and painful, but he has emerged stronger, his dignity intact. He knows this isn't the end. It's only the beginning of a larger fight for justice. But today, he allows himself a moment to celebrate. For the first time, Malcolm feels like he truly belongs.